It was a bright and sunny morning at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the kind of day that makes you feel like everything is going to go smoothly. For one family, though, things were about to take an unexpected turn. A mom and her twin daughters were getting ready to board their flight to Miami. They had been looking forward to this trip for weeks, a much-needed break from the stress of school and work. The girls, both 12 years old, couldn't stop talking about how excited they were to hit the beach, build sandcastles, and just enjoy some quality time together as a family. The three of them walked through the busy terminal, weaving past travelers, dragging suitcases and parents trying to keep track of energetic kids. The twins were identical in every way. Same curly hair, same bright eyes, and the same contagious laughter. Anyone who saw them could tell they shared a special bond. Their mom kept glancing at them with a smile, thinking about how lucky she was to have such wonderful daughters by her side. Once they boarded the plane, they found their seats near the middle of the cabin. The girls settled in quickly, pulling out books and snacks while their mom helped stow away their carry-on bags. As the plane taxied down the runway and lifted into the sky, the excitement continued. The view outside the window was breathtaking, and the hum of the engine seemed soothing rather than annoying. About halfway through the flight, something ordinary happened, or at least it started out that way. One of the twins raised her hand slightly and leaned over to whisper to her sister. "I need to use the bathroom," she said quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone around them. Her sister nodded, understanding completely because she felt the same way. Both girls unbuckled their seatbelts and stood up, making their way toward the front of the plane where the restrooms were located. When they reached the small line forming outside the restroom, one of the flight attendants approached them with a clipboard in hand. She gave them a quick once-over before shaking her head firmly. "Sorry, no restroom access right now," she told them matter-of-factly. The girls exchanged confused looks. What did she mean? It wasn't like the plane was experiencing turbulence or anything unusual. Still, they didn't want to cause trouble, so they returned to their seats without arguing. But here's the thing. Less than 5 minutes later, another passenger, a woman sitting across the aisle, got up and headed straight for the restroom. And guess what? The same flight attendant who had turned away the twins let her pass without hesitation. You can imagine how that made the girls feel. Confused, embarrassed, maybe even a little hurt. They tried to brush it off, but deep down they knew something wasn't right. Their mom noticed the change in their demeanor almost immediately. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only they could hear. "What's wrong?" she asked gently, her brow furrowing with concern. At first the girls hesitated, unsure if they should say anything, but then one of them blurted out what had happened. "We wanted to use the bathroom, but the lady said no. Then someone else went right after us." Maya's expression shifted instantly. If you've ever seen someone switch from calm to fiercely protective in a split second, that's exactly what happened here. She didn't jump up or start yelling, not yet anyway, but you could see the wheels turning in her mind. Something wasn't adding up, and she intended to find out why. As the minutes ticked by, Maya's thoughts raced. Was this really about following some obscure rule, or was there something deeper at play? She glanced around the cabin, observing the other passengers. Some were scrolling on their phones, others were sleeping, and a few were chatting with their neighbors. Everything seemed normal, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something unfair and possibly discriminatory had just occurred. She decided to act. Not impulsively, but thoughtfully. This wasn't just about her daughters. It was about standing up for what was right. So, when the opportunity presented itself, Maya took a deep breath, stood up, and walked over to the flight attendant who had denied her girls access to the restroom. Little did anyone on that plane know, this simple act would set off a chain reaction that none of them would soon forget. As Maya approached the flight attendant, her heart was pounding. She wasn't the kind of person who enjoyed confrontation, far from it. But this wasn't about her comfort, it was about fairness. Her daughters had been treated unfairly, and she couldn't let that slide. Standing there in the narrow aisle of the plane, she took a deep breath and spoke in a firm but calm voice. "I need to understand something," she began, looking directly at the flight attendant. "Why were my daughters told they couldn't use the restroom? And why did someone else get permission to go right after them?" The flight attendant blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. For a moment, there was silence. Then, fumbling for words, the attendant muttered something about company policies and safety regulations. Maya raised an eyebrow. Company policy? Safety regulations? She repeated slowly, making sure her tone stayed steady. Are you telling me there's some rule that says certain people can't use the bathroom while others can? The flight attendant hesitated, glancing around as if searching for backup. Passengers nearby were starting to pay attention now, their curiosity piqued by the exchange. The tension in the air was palpable. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or stay quiet. Others leaned forward slightly, eager to hear what would happen next. One older man sitting near the window gave Maya a nod of encouragement, his expression serious but supportive. It was clear he understood where she was coming from. The flight attendant tried again, this time with more confidence, or at least the appearance of it. Ma'am, we have specific intervals when passengers are allowed to use the restroom. It's not personal, it's just how things work on flights. Maya stared at her for a long moment, letting the words sink in. Then, without raising her voice, she replied, That doesn't explain why another passenger, a white woman, was allowed to use the restroom immediately after my daughters were denied. Are you saying she followed these so-called intervals while my daughters didn't? The flight attendant froze. Her face flushed red and she opened her mouth to respond but seemed unable to find the right words. Around them, the murmurs grew louder. A few passengers exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. One woman leaned over to her, seatmate, and whispered loud enough for others to hear, That sounds like discrimination to me. Maya turned her attention back to the flight attendant. This isn't okay, she said firmly. My daughters deserve respect. They're kids and they shouldn't be made to feel less than because of the color of their skin. Her voice carried across the cabin, drawing even more attention. By now, almost everyone on board was watching the scene unfold. The flight crew scrambled to regain control of the situation. Another flight attendant appeared, stepping between Maya and the original attendant. Let's try to resolve this calmly, the second attendant said, attempting to sound reassuring. But Maya wasn't about to back down. She knew when someone was trying to smooth things over without actually addressing the problem. Calmly is exactly what I'm doing, Maya shot back, her voice still level but laced with determination. But resolving this means acknowledging what happened here. My daughters were singled out and that's unacceptable. At this point, the atmosphere on the plane had shifted entirely. What had started as a routine flight was now anything but ordinary. Passengers were no longer pretending to focus on their books or phones. Conversations broke out in hushed tones, and several people nodded in agreement with Maya's words. Someone even clapped softly, though they quickly stopped when others shushed them. Realizing the situation was spiraling beyond their control, the flight attendants conferred briefly before one of them disappeared toward the front of the plane. Moments later, the intercom crackled to life and the pilot's voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We're experiencing a minor issue that will be resolved shortly. Maya crossed her arms and stood her ground. She wasn't fooled by the vague announcement. Instead, she addressed the other passengers directly. This isn't just about me and my daughters, she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the hum of the engines. It's about standing up against unfair treatment. If we don't speak out when we see injustice, nothing will ever change. Her words struck a chord. Several passengers nodded in agreement while others looked thoughtful. One young man sitting a few rows away gave her a thumbs up. Even the flight attendants seemed uneasy, shifting nervously as they realized the tide was turning against them. Meanwhile, Maya's daughters sat quietly in their seats watching their mom with wide eyes. They'd never seen her like this before, so assertive, so unshakable. Part of them felt proud, but another part worried about what might happen next. Would they get in trouble? Would the airline retaliate somehow? Maya must have sensed their unease because she walked back to their seats and knelt down beside them. You two did nothing wrong, she whispered, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. I'm handling this, okay? Trust me. The The girls nodded, though they still looked uncertain. Maya gave them a reassuring smile before standing up again. She pulled out her phone and opened the camera app, holding it up for everyone to see. "I'm documenting this," she announced to the cabin. "Because what's happening here isn't right and the world needs to know about it." Her declaration sent shockwaves through the plane. Some passengers applauded quietly, while others simply watched in awe. One woman even offered to record video herself in case Maya needed backup. The solidarity among the passengers was undeniable. They weren't just bystanders anymore. They were witnesses to something bigger than any of them could have anticipated. As the minutes ticked by, it became clear that the flight crew was struggling to figure out their next move. Maya, however, was ready. She had already decided that if the airline refused to acknowledge the wrongdoing, she wouldn't hesitate to take matters into her own hands. After all, sometimes justice requires bold action, and Maya was prepared to do whatever it took to ensure her daughters received the respect they deserved. By this point, the entire plane was buzzing with anticipation. No one knew exactly how things would play out, but one thing was certain. Maya's courage had ignited something powerful. Whether it led to an apology, a protest, or something else entirely, the ripple effects of her actions would be felt far beyond the confines of the airplane. As the tension on the plane reached its peak, Maya's phone was already recording. She held it steadily in her hand, making sure the camera captured everything: the nervous glances of the flight attendants, the murmurs of the passengers, and the growing sense of unease that filled the cabin. Her calm demeanor masked the storm brewing inside her. This wasn't just about a restroom anymore. It was about dignity, respect, and teaching her daughters, and everyone else on that plane, that standing up for what's right is worth every ounce of effort. With the video rolling, Maya addressed the flight attendants again. "I'm giving you one more chance to explain yourselves," she said firmly but without raising her voice. "If you can't provide a valid reason for treating my daughters differently than other passengers, then I'll make sure this story gets shared with the world." The flight attendants exchanged panicked looks. One of them whispered urgently into a headset, likely contacting the cockpit or ground staff. Meanwhile, the other attempted to placate Maya, offering vague reassurances like, "We're looking into this and let's not escalate things." But Maya wasn't buying it. She had seen enough injustice in her life to know when someone was trying to dodge responsibility. Around her, the passengers were becoming increasingly vocal. Middle-aged man seated near the aisle leaned forward and chimed in, "Lady, you're doing the right thing. Don't let them brush this under the rug." His words earned nods of agreement from those nearby. Another passenger, a young woman traveling alone, added, "This happens way too often. People need to be held accountable." Maya appreciated the support, but she didn't let it distract her. She focused instead on pressing the flight crew for answers. When none came, she decided to take her message directly to the person in charge, the pilot. Using the intercom button near her seat, she requested to speak with him. At first, the flight attendants hesitated, clearly unsure whether to comply. But Maya stood her ground, reminding them that she was well within her rights to demand transparency. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Attention, passengers. We are experiencing a minor issue that will require us to make an unscheduled stop shortly. Please remain calm and stay seated until further instructions." The announcement sent a ripple of confusion through the cabin. Some passengers groaned, assuming there was a mechanical problem. Others whispered among themselves, speculating about what might really be happening. Maya immediately suspected the truth. The airline was attempting to defuse the situation by landing early, but she wasn't about to let them off the hook that easily. She stood up once more, addressing the entire plane. "Let's be clear about something," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "This isn't a technical issue. This is about discrimination. My daughters deserve better, and so do all of us. If we land early, it won't be because of some made-up emergency. It'll be because the airline knows they messed up." Her words resonated deeply with the passengers. Many nodded in agreement, while others voiced their support aloud. One elderly woman seated near the front called out, You tell him, sweetheart, we've got your back. The mood on the plane shifted dramatically. What had started as a tense confrontation was now morphing into something bigger, a collective stand against unfair treatment. Meanwhile, the flight attendants looked increasingly flustered. They huddled together near the galley, whispering frantically and occasionally glancing at Maya. It was obvious they hadn't anticipated such a strong reaction from the passengers. Normally, incidents like this were swept under the rug, ignored, or dismissed as isolated misunderstandings. But this time was different. This time people weren't willing to stay silent. As the plane began its descent toward the nearest airport, Maya returned to her seat beside her daughters. Both girls looked up at her with wide eyes, their expressions a mix of pride and worry. "Mom, are we in trouble?" one of them asked quietly. Maya shook her head and smiled reassuringly. "No, sweetie, we're not in trouble. We're doing the right thing. Sometimes standing up for yourself means facing challenges, but it's always worth it." The twins nodded, though they still seemed uncertain. Maya wrapped an arm around each of them, pulling them close. "Trust me, okay? Everything's going to be fine." By the time the plane touched down, the energy on board was electric. Passengers disembarked slowly, many stopping to thank Maya for her courage. Some even offered to share their contact information in case legal action became necessary. One man handed her a business card saying, "I'm a lawyer. If you need help taking this further, call me." Maya accepted the gesture graciously, tucking the card into her pocket. She knew this moment could lead to something bigger, something that might spark real change. As she stepped off the plane with her daughters, she noticed reporters gathered at the gate. Word of the incident had spread quickly thanks to the videos she posted online during the flight. News outlets had picked up the story, and hashtags like #Stand for Justice were trending on social media. Reporters rushed forward, microphones in hand, eager to hear her side of the story. Maya took a deep breath before speaking. "This isn't just about my family," she told them. "It's about holding institutions accountable when they fail to treat people fairly. My daughters were humiliated today, and I won't stand for it. No parent should have to watch their children be treated as less than human simply because of the color of their skin." Her words struck a chord with the crowd. People nodded in agreement, snapping photos and capturing video clips. Social media erupted with reactions as thousands of users weighed in on the unfolding drama. Some praised Maya for her bravery, calling her a role model for parents everywhere. Others shared their own stories of discrimination, adding fuel to the fire. The hashtag, Justice for the Family, began trending worldwide, drawing attention to systemic issues within the travel industry. Back on the plane, the flight crew was visibly shaken. The pilot emerged from the cockpit looking pale and uneasy. He approached Maya cautiously, extending a hesitant apology. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for any discomfort caused during the flight," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll investigate this thoroughly." Maya crossed her arms and stared at him for a long moment. "An apology isn't enough," she replied evenly. "What happened here today was wrong, and it needs to be addressed. Not just for my family, but for everyone who's ever faced similar treatment. Words mean nothing without action." The pilot nodded, clearly at a loss for how to respond. Behind him, the flight attendants avoided eye contact, their earlier confidence replaced by shame and uncertainty. Maya didn't gloat or rub it in. She simply turned away, focusing on comforting her daughters and preparing for the next steps. They left the terminal. Surrounded by reporters and supporters alike, Maya felt a surge of determination. She knew this fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. The airline might try to sweep the incident under the rug, but she wouldn't let them. With the power of public opinion behind her, she was ready to push for real change. And if that meant taking her battle to the highest levels of corporate accountability, so be it. For Maya, this wasn't just about winning, it was about sending a message. Discrimination thrives in silence, and she was determined to break that silence once and for all. As she walked away from the airport with her head held high, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this moment would inspire others to stand up and speak out too. The unscheduled landing brought the plane to a halt at a small regional airport. Passengers disembarked, some visibly frustrated, others curious about what would happen next. The airline staff scrambled to manage the situation, but it was clear. They were caught off guard by the intensity of the public reaction. Reporters and camera crews swarmed the terminal, eager to capture every detail of the unfolding drama. For Maya, this was both overwhelming and empowering. She knew she had struck a nerve, and now the world was watching. As she stepped off the plane with her daughters, Maya felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, there was pride in standing up for her family. On the other, there was exhaustion from the emotional toll of confronting discrimination head-on. Her daughters clung to her side, still unsure of how to process everything that had happened. Despite their confusion, they couldn't help but notice the growing crowd of supporters, who cheered softly as they passed. Strangers approached Maya, offering words of encouragement. One woman handed her a tissue, saying, "You're doing something important here. Keep going." Maya thanked her warmly, touched by the kindness of strangers. It reminded her that even in moments of injustice, there are always people willing to stand alongside you. But while the support buoyed her spirits, she also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Facing down a massive corporation wasn't something anyone did lightly, especially when it involved legal battles and media scrutiny. Still, Maya refused to back down. This wasn't just about her daughters anymore. It was about creating a safer, fairer world for everyone. Back inside the terminal, airline representatives gathered in a corner, whispering urgently into phones and scribbling notes. They tried to approach Maya several times, each attempt more awkward than the last. Finally, a senior manager emerged, his face flushed with embarrassment. He introduced himself and offered a formal apology, claiming the incident was an isolated mistake by a single employee. Maya listened carefully, her expression unreadable. When he finished speaking, she responded firmly. "An apology is a start, but it's not enough. What happened on that plane wasn't just a mistake. It was part of a pattern of systemic bias that affects countless families. Every day. If your company truly wants to make amends, you'll need to do more than issue empty words." The manager nodded quickly, clearly unprepared for her response. "Of course," he stammered. "We're committed to addressing these issues. We'll launch an internal investigation," and Maya cut him off. "Investigations are fine, but actions speak louder than words. I want to see real change. Mandatory training for all employees, stricter enforcement of anti-discrimination policies, and transparency in how complaints are handled. Anything less won't cut it." Her demands sent shockwaves through the room. Passengers nearby applauded softly, while reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. The manager looked flustered, but agreed to consider her proposals. As he retreated to consult with his team, Maya turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. "This isn't just about my family," she said, her voice steady and powerful. "It's about holding institutions accountable. Discrimination doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's rooted in systems that allow it to thrive. Today, we have an opportunity to shine a light on those systems and demand better. Together, we can create change." Her speech resonated deeply with the audience. People began sharing live updates on social media, tagging major news outlets and advocacy groups. Within hours, the story exploded online. Videos of Maya confronting the flight attendants went viral, racking up millions of views. Hashtags like accountability, inaction, and stand with them trended globally, drawing attention to the broader issue of racial bias in the travel industry. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to control the narrative. Their PR team issued a statement condemning discrimination and promising to review internal policies. But many saw the response as too little, too late. Critics pointed out that similar incidents had occurred before, yet the airline had failed to implement meaningful reforms. Maya read the statement aloud during a press conference, pausing to highlight its flaws. "They talk about reviewing policies," she said, shaking her head. "But reviews don't fix problems. Action does. Until we see concrete steps being taken, this apology means nothing." Her critique earned widespread praise, with advocates calling her a trailblazer for justice. As the hours passed, Maya's resolve only grew stronger. She spent much of the day fielding calls from lawyers, journalists, and activists eager to support her cause. One prominent civil rights organization reached out, offering to represent her pro bono in a potential lawsuit against the airline. Another group invited her to speak at an upcoming conference focused on combating systemic racism. Each offer reinforced her belief that this moment could lead to lasting change. By evening, the family finally boarded a new flight to Miami. The mood on board was markedly different this time. Fellow passengers greeted them warmly, offering hugs and words of encouragement. Flight attendants went out of their way to ensure the twins felt comfortable, even bringing them snacks and drinks without being asked. It was a stark contrast to the hostility they'd faced earlier, and a reminder of how powerful collective action could be. During the flight, Maya took a moment to reflect. She glanced at her daughters, who were sleeping soundly after an exhausting day. Despite everything, they seemed peaceful, perhaps sensing that their mom had fought hard to protect them. Maya felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the support she'd received, but for the opportunity to teach her girls an invaluable lesson. Standing up for yourself isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. When they arrived in Miami, the scene at the airport was unlike anything Maya had expected. Dozens of supporters greeted them, holding signs that read, "Justice starts here and we stand with you." Local activists joined the crowd, eager to lend their voices to the cause. Maya hugged her daughters tightly, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and solidarity. Over the next few days, the story continued to dominate headlines. Major networks covered the incident extensively, interviewing Maya and showcasing clips of her courageous stand on the plane. Social media remained ablaze with discussions about accountability and reform. Influencers and celebrities weighed in, amplifying the message and urging their followers to demand change. For Maya, the whirlwind of attention was both exhilarating and exhausting. She juggled interviews, meetings with lawyers, and conversations with advocacy groups, all while ensuring her daughters stayed grounded amidst the chaos. Despite the pressure, she remained steadfast in her mission. Every interview, every speech, and every interaction was an opportunity to drive home the importance of equality and respect. As the dust began to settle, Maya realized this fight was far from over. The airline had promised reforms, but promises were meaningless without follow-through. She vowed to hold them accountable, using the power of public opinion to keep the pressure on. In the meantime, she focused on building a coalition of like-minded individuals dedicated to fighting discrimination wherever it occurred. Looking back on that fateful flight, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose. What had started as a routine trip had transformed into a catalyst for change. The experience taught her that courage comes in many forms, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak up when it matters most. And though the journey ahead would be challenging, she knew she wasn't alone. Thousands of people stood with her, united in the belief that fairness and dignity should never be negotiable. For Maya and her daughters, this was more than a victory. It was the beginning of a movement fueled by resilience, determination, and the unshakable belief that justice is worth fighting for. The days following the incident were a whirlwind for Maya and her daughters. What had started as a personal fight against discrimination quickly grew into something much larger. A national conversation about systemic bias in industries like air travel. The airline, realizing the weight of the backlash, scrambled to mitigate the damage. Their stock prices plummeted, and customers began canceling flights en masse. Social media was flooded with calls for boycotts, and hashtags like Mar Boycott Bias and Justice for All dominated platforms. Maya, however, wasn't satisfied with just an apology or vague promises. She knew that real change required accountability and proof that the airline was willing to take meaningful steps toward reform. So when the company reached out again, offering compensation and pledging to do better, Maya pushed back harder than ever. "Money isn't the solution here," she told them during a tense phone call. "This isn't about me or my family getting paid off. It's about ensuring no one else has to go through what we did." Her determination caught the attention of advocacy groups across the country. One organization specializing in civil rights litigation contacted her, offering to represent her pro bono in a lawsuit against the airline. They explained that this case could set a precedent, forcing not only the airline but also other companies in the industry to address discriminatory practices head-on. Maya agreed, knowing this was her chance to make a lasting impact. As the legal process began, Maya became a central figure in the fight for justice. She spent hours consulting with lawyers, reviewing documents, and strategizing how best to hold the airline accountable. At the same time, she continued speaking publicly about her experience, using interviews and social media to keep the issue alive in people's minds. Her message was simple, yet powerful. Discrimination thrives when it's ignored, and silence only perpetuates harm. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. The airline fought back fiercely, attempting to downplay the severity of the incident. In court filings, they argued that the flight attendants' actions were unintentional and unrelated to race, claims that sparked outrage among supporters of Maya's cause. Legal experts weighed in, pointing out that such arguments often served as smokescreens to deflect responsibility. Maya remained unfazed, leaning on her faith, her community, and her unwavering belief in doing what was right. Amidst the chaos, Maya made sure to shield her daughters from the brunt of the stress. While they understood the gravity of the situation, she worked tirelessly to ensure their lives remained as normal as possible. During quiet moments at home, she'd sit with them, explaining why standing up for justice mattered so much. "You, too, are strong, smart, and capable," she'd say. "What happened on that plane doesn't define you, but how we respond to it does." Her words resonated deeply with the girls, who began to see themselves as part of something bigger. Inspired by their mom's courage, they joined her in spreading awareness. Together, they created videos sharing their story, emphasizing the importance of treating everyone with kindness and respect. These heartfelt messages struck a chord with viewers, especially young people, who praised the twins for their bravery and maturity. Back in the courtroom, the case gained traction. Evidence emerged showing that similar incidents of racial bias had occurred on the airline before, but had gone unaddressed due to lack of visibility or follow-through. Internal emails revealed complaints filed by passengers and employees alike, painting a troubling picture of systemic negligence. Advocacy groups seized on this information, amplifying the call for accountability. Facing mounting pressure, the airline finally caved. In a dramatic turn of events, they agreed to settle the lawsuit, not just financially, but through comprehensive reforms aimed at preventing future discrimination. Among the changes were mandatory anti-bias training programs for all staff, updated policies ensuring equitable treatment of passengers, and regular audits conducted by independent oversight committees. Additionally, the airline pledged to create a task force dedicated to addressing issues of racial equity within the company. When the settlement was announced, the response was overwhelming. Supporters celebrated the victory, hailing Maya as a trailblazer for justice. News outlets covered the resolution extensively, highlighting the significance of the reforms. For many, it was a reminder that collective action could lead to tangible results. Maya herself acknowledged the milestone, thanking everyone who had supported her along the way. "This isn't just my win, it's ours," she said during a press conference. "It's proof that when we stand together, we can move mountains." Yet even as she basked in the triumph, Maya remained grounded. She knew the work wasn't over. Bias and discrimination weren't confined to one airline or one industry. They were pervasive problems that required ongoing vigilance. With this in mind, she partnered with advocacy groups to launch a nationwide campaign aimed at combating racism in public spaces. The initiative focused on education, policy reform, and grassroots organizing, empowering communities to demand fairness and equality. Her efforts inspired others to join the movement. Parents shared stories of their own experiences with discrimination, vowing to teach their children the value of standing up for what's right. Educators incorporated Maya's story into classroom discussions, encouraging students to reflect on privilege, bias, and allyship. Even businesses took notice, revisiting their own practices to ensure inclusivity and respect for all customers. Through it all, Maya stayed true to her roots. Despite the newfound fame and recognition, she remained humble and approachable. Friends and neighbors described her as the same loving, determined woman they'd always known. Her daughters, too, continued to thrive, embracing their roles as advocates while navigating the ups and downs of adolescence. Together, the three of them proved that courage and resilience could spark change far beyond what anyone might expect. Looking back on the journey, Maya felt a profound sense of gratitude for the strangers who had rallied behind her, for the organizations that had lent their expertise, and most importantly, for her daughters whose strength reminded her daily why the fight mattered. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, she faced it with hope and determination. After all, she had already shown the world what was possible when someone refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. For Maya and her family, this chapter was more than a victory. It was a testament to the power of standing up, speaking out, and demanding better. And as they moved forward, they carried with them the knowledge that their actions had ignited a flame that would continue to burn brightly, inspiring countless others to join the fight for a fairer, kinder world. The victory against the airline marked a turning point, not just for Maya and her daughters, but for countless others who had silently endured similar injustices. The settlement sent shockwaves through the travel industry, forcing companies to reevaluate their policies and practices. For Maya, though, the real reward wasn't the money or even the reforms. It was the ripple effect of change that followed. People everywhere were inspired to speak up, share their stories, and demand accountability from institutions that had long ignored them. In the months after the lawsuit concluded, Maya became a beacon of hope for marginalized communities. She traveled across the country, speaking at schools, community centers, and conferences about her experience. Her talks weren't just about what happened on that plane. They were about resilience, courage, and the importance of standing up for one's dignity. Whether addressing a room of high school students or seasoned activists, she always emphasized the same message. Change starts with you. It might feel scary to raise your voice, but remember, you're not alone. Her daughters joined her whenever possible, sharing their perspective as young people who had witnessed firsthand how discrimination could hurt. They spoke candidly about the fear and confusion they felt during the incident, but also about the pride they now carried knowing their family had turned a painful moment into something positive. Their presence added a layer of authenticity to Maya's message, reminding audiences that injustice affects everyone, regardless of age. As word spread about Maya's advocacy work, she began receiving invitations from unexpected places. A major television network asked her to host a special documentary series exploring systemic bias in various industries. Filmmakers reached out, hoping to adapt her story into a feature film. Even fashion brands approached her, wanting to collaborate on campaigns promoting inclusivity and equality. While Maya carefully considered each opportunity, she remained focused on her mission, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what her family went through. One of her most impactful projects was co-founding an organization aimed at combating racial bias in public spaces. The group worked tirelessly to educate businesses, schools, and government agencies on creating environments where everyone felt respected and valued. Through workshops, seminars, and online resources, they provided tools and strategies for identifying and addressing discriminatory behavior. Within its first year, the organization grew exponentially, attracting support from leaders in multiple fields. But perhaps Maya's greatest legacy was the way she empowered ordinary people to take action. Social media played a huge role in this, allowing individuals to share their own experiences and connect with others fighting similar battles. Inspired by Maya's example, many began documenting incidents of bias, whether on planes, in stores, or elsewhere, and calling out offenders publicly. Some launched petitions demanding policy changes, while others organized protests and rallies. What started as a single act of defiance on a cramped airplane cabin blossomed into a nationwide movement. Maya's daughters continued to thrive too, embracing their roles as advocates in their own right. At school, they encouraged classmates to stand up against bullying and prejudice. On social media, they posted uplifting messages and tips for handling difficult situations with grace and confidence. Their mom often joked that they were becoming better public speakers than she was, but deep down, she couldn't have been prouder. Watching them grow into compassionate, courageous young women filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't known before. Of course, life didn't suddenly become easy. There were still moments of doubt and frustration, days when the weight of the fight felt overwhelming. Maya sometimes struggled with balancing her advocacy work with being present for her daughters. Critics occasionally accused her of seeking attention or overstating the problem, though these voices were drowned out by the overwhelming support she received. Through it all, she reminded herself why she'd started this journey in the first place: to create a world where her children, and all children, could live without fear of being treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. As time passed, the impact of Maya's efforts became undeniable. Airlines implemented stricter anti-discrimination measures, including anonymous reporting systems for passengers and mandatory sensitivity training for staff. Retail chains revamped their customer service protocols to ensure equitable treatment. Schools incorporated lessons on privilege and bias into their curriculums. Even small businesses took notice, adopting inclusive hiring practices and fostering welcoming environments for diverse customers. For Maya, seeing these changes unfold was deeply rewarding, but it was the personal connections that meant the most. Strangers would approach her in grocery stores or airports, tears in their eyes, thanking her for giving them the courage to speak out. Parents wrote letters describing how her story had inspired them to teach their kids about justice and empathy. Teachers shared photos of classroom discussions sparked by her advocacy. Each interaction reinforced her belief that every voice mattered, and that together, those voices could move mountains. Looking back, Maya realized how much she had grown since that fateful flight. She had started as a mother simply trying to protect her daughters, unaware of the larger implications of her actions. Now she was a leader, a role model, and a catalyst for change. Yet despite her newfound prominence, she stayed grounded, focusing on the values that had guided her from the beginning: love, fairness, and determination. On the anniversary of the incident, Maya decided to mark the occasion with a quiet celebration. She took her daughters to the beach, the same destination they had been headed to on that turbulent flight. As they built sandcastles and splashed in the waves, Maya reflected on how far they'd come. The scars of that day would always remain, but so would the strength they had gained from facing adversity head-on. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya gathered her daughters close. "You know," she said softly, gazing out at the ocean, "we didn't choose this fight. But I'm glad we stood our ground, because if we hadn't, none of the good things we've seen would have happened." Her daughters nodded, their faces glowing with understanding. "We're proud of you, Mom," one of them said, "and we're proud of us." Maya smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. This journey had tested her in ways she never imagined, but it had also shown her the incredible power of unity and perseverance. Together, she and her daughters had proven that even in the face of injustice, courage could light the path forward. And as long as there were people willing to walk that path, the fight for equality would continue, stronger, braver, and more hopeful than ever.